To go.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a wonderful webinar. You're in for a real treat. I did a practice session with the presenter, Mary Dudley, whose voice you're going to hear in just a moment and whose picture you can see on the left-hand side of the slide. Uh, she's got a wonderful presentation lined up for you, so you're in for a real treat. And in fact, this is a re-recording of a webinar that we did a week ago, and unfortunately the recording didn't work properly, so we're going to re-record this without an audience so that everyone can have access, ready and quick access to a great session. And before I introduce Mary, let me just explain a few things. This is being recorded. You will have a chance to view this webinar. Will be available for 30 days into November, middle of November. So please do, if you enjoy this session, as I think you will, please let your friends know that they can freely view it until mid-November, and beyond that, the webinar can only be viewed by subscribers to Green Teacher magazine. And while I mention Green Teacher, let me just say it's a magazine that's the nonprofit magazine that's been sharing innovative strategies for youth education. Mary, if you can advance that slide, Mary. It's a place where educators share their best ideas, and it's a magazine for both teachers and non-teachers who work with kids. And over the last 10 years, we've also had the pleasure of publishing a number of books. And I mention these books and the magazine simply to say that while we're delighted to be able we'd like to continue offering these webinars for free, we're really dependent on you, the participant, to subscribe and or purchasing books. That's what enables us to do that. So without further ado, let me introduce Mary Dudley. Oh, sorry, thank you, Mary. We're also very fortunate to have a whole set of organizations, both here in Canada, whose logos you can see right here, and American webinar partners whose logos now appear on the screen. And I would invite you and they've been very helpful in promoting this and other webinars that we've been doing. And I would strongly encourage you, if you live in one of these states or in one of the provinces on the last screen, to really check out those organizations and consider joining them. They're really a great organization. So without further ado, let me introduce Mary Dudley. And you can, by a way of a quick introduction, you can see that she wrote a wonderful article with the same title in a recent issue of Green Teacher, and there's the cover from that issue. And it was because of the wonderful article that she wrote and the wonderful feedback we got about that article that I invited Mary to do this webinar. So more about Mary. Since 2008, she's been working in school garden initiatives, both in temperate and subtropical climates. Not surprisingly, she holds a master's degree in botany. When I worked with her on this article, still on the screen, she was the youth education coordinator at the Civic Garden Center of Greater Cincinnati in Ohio. And more recently, she started a new job this fall as the agricultural education teacher at the Gamble Montessori High School in the Cincinnati Public School District. At the school, she teaches 140 students in grades 7 to 12, and as you can see on the screen, the article that Best Practices for School Gardens was published in Green Teacher number 109, the fall 2016 issue, and covers much the same ground as her webinar presentation. Mary, a warm welcome and a hearty welcome to you on this rainy morning.
Thank you so much, Tim. I appreciate it. All right, so let's get started. I really am talking about a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I have been working with teachers and students and botanical education for over a decade now, and I really can't imagine doing anything more. I just feel so lucky to be in this field, and I know that a lot of you watching now are also enjoying getting students outside and doing something hands-on that they can use for their future and really add some resiliency to their lives. And so I welcome you to this webinar. We are going to talk about some best practices. So, I want to preface by saying that I have worked with hundreds of schools and thousands of teachers and students, and no garden is identical to the other. And so, these best practices are just a guide for you as we go. There are some definite steps that you can take to be successful. And so, we'll go through 6 basic steps that I think are very vital to starting a sustainable school garden program. And that first step is forming a team. And then you're going to be setting your goals and crafting a mission statement, designing an outdoor space, and then really digging in and getting started with your plantings, implementing some curriculum, and then reflecting and revising. And so all educators know that that's a very important step. What I really enjoyed about writing this article with Tim was that he challenged me to do something new and different and say, people have been talking about school gardens for a while now. What can we do that's a little bit different? And so we decided to get real and get down to the nitty gritty of how hard it can be to have a school garden program. Over 50% of school gardens fail within their first year because people don't take the proper steps to really make sure that that project's going to be sustainable. And so we want you to avoid those pitfalls. And some of you might be inheriting a garden that's been in disrepair, like I did when I came to this school. Or maybe you're starting a brand new project. So no matter where you are in your garden adventure, then I think it's very important to look at least at these 6 steps and see how you're meeting each one. Of course, there are dozens more. I run full day workshops, and so I'm going to try to distill some of that information down into this short webinar. But this is just the beginning of a conversation, and you're more than welcome to contact me anytime. And Green Teacher is a fantastic resource that you can use as well. So yeah, we got real with this article. We're going to talk about challenges and ways that you can employ strategies to meet them. So we're going to have a positive spin on it, but it is a new adventure and a new challenge and more opportunities for students. So I really want you to think about ways that you can integrate some of these steps. All right, why school gardens? I know I'm definitely preaching to the choir here, and so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but we all need to spend more time in nature, and it's very therapeutic and healing. It's great for our mental health, it's great for our physical health. Our test scores go up when we're able to have a little bit of time outside. So I just am really interested in giving students the opportunity to break away from some of their traditional classroom space and get outdoors and get their hands dirty and really experience life coming through. So if you want to have more information about the actual research that goes on, there's a lot of it that supports these activities, and that type of research can be very helpful when you are getting administrators on board and talking to parents about why this is important so they don't think you're just playing. It actually really is a strong set of research that they have. The Children in Nature Network has a wonderful set of research items that you can look through, and there are other websites too that you can check out, but that's a good one. All right, so step 1, we are forming a team that will support a garden project or an outdoor classroom at your school. And so here we have a group of teachers that are meeting to discuss, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? It's really important that this team is diverse and includes members of your faculty, of your administration, and your building maintenance folks. And so I don't know how many times I've gotten calls that, oh my goodness, our butterfly garden got mowed down over the summer because the people that were taking care of the landscaping didn't know that that was a project that was happening. So that communication is key. And the more people that you have on your team that can represent different sectors, the stronger your team and your project will be. But make sure that you have a team. I know that it's a lot easier to just go for a project and it's your idea and you're gung-ho and you're going to do it all. But what happens if you get overwhelmed? What happens if you decide to take another position somewhere else? Life happens and you can't always predict it. And so that's really when most of these gardens fall by the wayside, is when that really star teacher, that champion, moves on. And so they didn't really set up a team that could carry on the project. So make sure you've got a strong team. Sometimes it can be a little bit challenging to get a diverse team. And so here's some steps for success for you to really get personal. And so, an email's okay, but it's nice to actually walk into, say, a local business, and how can they contribute to your project? Maybe it's a restaurant close by. Are you going to be growing some food that they could use? Could they have a fundraiser event for you? Could they bring food over when you have a big volunteer day? And so think about making those really personal connections and going beyond just an email or maybe just a phone call and getting face to face. Also, make sure you employ productive meeting methods. Keep a set agenda and stick to it. Start on time, end on time or early. Have really clear next steps so that everyone feels like they're contributing and they're not just sitting through a presentation and signing their name on the sign-in sheet. Really have it be engaging. And so some ways that you can do that too is to have it in different places. Food is always a good thing to have, but really think about your agenda and how you're going to make the meeting productive. All right, so step 2, we're crafting a mission statement and setting some goals. And this is a school that we have right downtown, urban Cincinnati area. This is a high school, and so you can see here a teacher and a student are planting their market garden, and so they decided to do edibles in this space. And they just had a few raised beds at this point, and so this was just kind of a couple teachers. The science teacher's room is right next to the garden, and so she could take her students out just quickly during the day. And I drove past this school about a month ago, and it was just exploding with fruit trees, a huge compost system. They also have a really nice shed that they have built, and so it really was large expansion. And I talked to the teacher. I said, what happened? That's great. I wonder what changed. And it was going back to step 1, her team. She had a new member that joined her team. A new church moved in across the street, and they had a huge push for people to be involved in this project. And then they're being a big partner. They're donating supplies and volunteer hours. So it really was wonderful that she kept on forming her team. Even though her garden was several years old, she made sure that her team included neighbors and kept it fresh. So in this case, her goals and mission are to teach the students about life cycles and a little bit about entrepreneurship and financial responsibility, because they are able to make a little market garden out of this and sell some of their products. And so that fits very well with the space that they have at this school. Other goals and missions might be different. It might be to beautify an area. It might be to memorialize a student. Having a clear goal and mission really helps you have a rallying cry for your team members and get people on board with your project. So be sure that you have something clear. The steps to success for this is to have measurable goals. And this is something that I struggled with at the beginning, was to really say, okay, how am I going to meet my goals? And if you don't have measurements that you can take, you can't really say that you've met them. So SMART is an acronym that probably a lot of you have heard. And so using that guide for setting your goals is one that I would recommend. And you really want to capitalize on the unique aspects of your community. What makes your school special? That's why when I said at the beginning, no school garden is identical to the other one, because they're all reflecting their community, and it's their students that are unique, and it's their culture that's unique. And so you really want to use that. Why don't you think about doing something with your school mascot or your school colors, or maybe there's a particular festival that you really enjoy, and you could craft your mission statement in your garden around that. So make sure that you're keeping those points in mind. And then regularly review and revise as needed. No reason to say we've done it this way, because that's the way we've always done it. Make sure that it's fresh, and that as you add team members, those team members buy into the mission. And if they feel like it should shift, that's a conversation that's really worth having. All right, step 3, you're designing an outdoor classroom. I want you to think about your outdoor space just the same way you would think about your indoor space. How does it flow? Where are the materials going to be? How are students going to move around the space? Is it a safe place to be? Is it adequate size? all those things are really important to think about. Just like you would design stations in your room, you should think about having stations outside. If you look at this picture, you can see that I have 3 groups of students split up. So this was a class of 29 kindergartners, and they walked over to this community garden from their school. And it took me a little while, but I realized I cannot really have more than 10 students around a raised bed and think that I'm going to be able to, really do a lot of work with them. Once I have more than 10 students around a bed with tools, it just gets really chaotic. And then all of a sudden, Johnny comes over to you with this beautiful tomato, and it's like, oh, where did you get that? We're not growing tomatoes. He's like, I found it over there. And so now they're in the community garden space. And so really think about having small groups of students that you break up to do different tasks. So I have a reading group, for example, underneath the awning there. And we had an extra para and a teacher that came out. So all 3 groups were supervised by an adult, which was really wonderful. That doesn't always happen, but in this case it did. And so she's reading them a story, and then at the table there's a craft going on, and then there's a gardening group. And so we would rotate through groups about every 10 or 12 minutes, and so everybody would get to experience everything, and then all the tools would get put away. We would have a wrap up, and we would go back to school. So I definitely recommend doing that. Now, if you don't have extra adults, you can have some self-guided stations. The reading station, I can do self-guided. The students would pick out a book, who'd have several books that they could read. Basically, it's just kind of a holding pattern until they're ready to go to the gardening station. But having, again, more than 10 students was really, really difficult. So think about that. When you are designing your classroom, really be flexible. I put this picture up of a few beautiful herb plants in the windowsill. And for me and my experiences with teachers, this is just as much of a garden as 40 raised beds outside. It is accomplishing their goals, which is to teach students about plants, to have something that the students can grow and learn how seeds germinate. So don't think that you've got to be Martha Stewart. Really think about what are your goals and how can you meet them, and let yourself be flexible. Okay, we didn't get the funding for this, or this might not work out. We have an area that we thought we could develop and we can't. The garden at one of my schools was beautiful and well thought out and planned, and then 6 months later, like, oh, we're going to put a road through here so that we can have access to the backside of the football field. And I was like, what? So thinking about all of those things and letting yourself be flexible. So that school that had their garden moved, covered, they did get creative, and they found another space on the side of the building that they definitely, everyone, we're not having any plans to develop this, are we? And so they've learned their lesson there a little bit. But going back to step 1, that was important to have team members that can give you feedback on how you can develop your vision, and having those set goals and being flexible. Get creative too with your resources. So this rain barrel picture is at a local school, and they had a really tough spot that they were given to say, oh, you can put your garden here. And it was kind of steep and right in between 2 buildings, and it's just a little strange. But they made lemons with made lemonade out of lemons, and they created a rain garden. And so it's a perennial space, and they can use plants that don't require the 8 to 10 hours of sun. And they put in some of these beautiful barrels, and it's been wonderful for the students to learn about the water cycle and how they can conserve resources. And when they get to water plants with rain from the barrel, that is just something that they light up about. So yeah, just make sure that you're being flexible with yourself, and letting your team members help you design your outdoor space. All right, step 4. You're ready to dig in. You've got your team, you've got your goals, and you've got your space. And so now it's time to get the tools out and start digging and start building. And invite a lot of people to this event. Invite the media, invite parents, students, teachers, really, really make it public. Put up posters. This is an event where everybody can get involved, and they really can get a sense of ownership if they're at the event. And so in this picture, I've got a summer camp, and we were building picnic tables. And so the adults kind of sat down to do the work, and after about 10 minutes, the children all decided they wanted to blow bubbles instead of do that. But they were really enjoying being around the tools and seeing the work get done. And then some of them did float back over and contribute. And at the end of the day, that was their picnic table. They made that, and so that was something special that they could come back to. And they also respected the tools and the materials more. They're not going to necessarily mess up something that they feel ownership over and that they feel is theirs. So that was really nice. But this is a wonderful event. There aren't enough good stories in the news. I really recommend that you make a big deal out of your installation date, even if it's just a small little butterfly garden with 10 plants in it, or it's a new dedication for a sign or a brand new memorial tree. I mean, those stories are what we need to hear in the news now. Making sure that you're successful with this, here's where the money comes in. And I wish it grew right out of the ground like this. That would be so wonderful. But it does not. And it's important that you have money coming in annually for your project. Gardens are not a one and done type of thing, and you're going to need money for new soil or plants that might need to be replaced, new tools. So just thinking about how you're going to get a few $100s annually, depending on the size of your project, and then initially, a little bit more, a bigger chunk of money. So are you going to have grants? Are you going to have sponsorships? Are you going to have fundraising events? How is that going to work? So really think about that. Again, that's where a diverse team comes in really well, because if you have local business owners and you have a lot of people that are engaged with your project, they're not going to want to see it go by the wayside. So they're going to be active in trying to raise money for you too. We have put together a list of grants for you that are international, so definitely be checking on that, and you can get some of that grant information. And what's going to help you too is keeping current with sustainable methods. So I was spending hundreds of dollars, on seeds every year, and it was because I wasn't really employing sustainable methods. I was giving a packet of seeds to a student, and they would dump the whole thing into one hole, and there you go. That's $4. And so I decided, okay, how can I look at this differently? This isn't working. So we started to make seed mats and seed tape first. And then we started saving our own seeds. And that's an experience that I had not previously had. So that was actually really exciting for me as a veteran gardener to do something new and kind of, have that moment where I'm not sure if I'm doing this right. And that was really exciting. But once you leave the carrot in the ground and see it flower in its second year and collect those seeds, and then you can add some sustainability to your program. I don't need to buy seeds because I can dependably get seeds. So what else is kind of your biggest cost? I think looking at that and saying, okay, how can we make our own, close our own loop on that? And so we are making compost in our gardens. There are other places that we can get donated manure, things like that. So really try to get your costs down as much as you can with sustainable methods, but also, make sure that you're on that grant cycle. Another thing that's going to be wonderful for you to get good grants is to have that clear mission statement. So all these steps really tie in with each other. But if you have a clear mission statement, writing those grants is going to be a lot easier than if you're constantly trying to set new goals every time you write a new grant. All right, step 5. So we're ready to implement some curriculum. We've got the students out there. We've got some things growing. We got some things going on. The sky is the limit when you're thinking about different ways that you can integrate curriculum. And I have yet to see a standard that I couldn't do outside. I have done every discipline outside. I have put cross-curricular connections together, intergenerational opportunities for students to work with volunteers and other community members is wonderful. But yeah, I mean, science is kind of the one go-to. Okay, we're going to teach science out here, but you can teach math, you can use area, you can measure different things, you can use volume, you can teach social studies with cultural ideas. We had a really neat garden in Miami, Florida that I worked with that had a big Haitian population. And so they made a bon manger garden, and they used a lot of wonderfully cultural relevant plants in their garden after the students interviewed their families and came up with a list of plants that they use. That was really, really wonderful. And so really think about how you can get outside the box. Are you going to use the garden for art? Are you going to have music lessons out there? Physical education? And so think about the ways that you can use that outdoor classroom, not only for content, but also as context. You can just go out there and read a story to the students and enjoy being in a safe space outside. So there's lots of different things you can do. But either way, at the end of the day, students love to be outside and they don't get it enough. Every day my students come in, are we going outside today? Are we going outside? My answer is always yes. And they get excited about that. And then it's, just that excitement when they go out the doors and they've got a job to do, sure. But when you get outside those four walls of the classroom, so much more learning can take place than you ever thought possible. I recommend you trying to look for some volunteers. It is difficult to bring out an entire class by yourself. I, have in the past as an informal educator, at least always had one other adult when I was working with a class because I had the other teacher. And now that I've been working in my own classroom for a couple of months, I have been most of the time the only adult out. And when you're taking 30 students out, it's a little bit nerve-wracking. Are they going to be safe? Are they going to listen? What are we going to do? So making sure that you're setting that up so that they can really still stay focused. You need to practice transitions. You need to really get them behaviorally ready to do work outside so that they know it's not recess time. And that takes a while. So be patient with yourself, be patient with your students, set up appropriate procedures and practice those. Really start small. Okay, we're going to go out for 15 minutes today. We're going to go out for 30 minutes tomorrow. Work yourself up to those bigger projects. Okay, we're going to have 5 of you working on this and 5 of you on this. So how are you going to organize the students when you get outside? Again, thinking about the way that you designed the outdoor space. How's it going to flow? And don't be afraid to change things that aren't working. Definitely give yourself the space to do that. And follow some student interests. So we had a bunch of cucumber beetles that came up on our garden one year, and as the master gardener volunteer wanted to just start smashing them, the students were like, ah! And so they wanted to explore that a little bit more. They didn't want to just get rid of the pests. They saw that as an opportunity. And I did too. I said, okay, well, let's learn a little bit about insects today. And, they don't need to really get focused on, the problems that are being caused by the pest. They are more fascinated by the pest itself. And so I think that the function of, integrated pest management, other things like that can come later after they've really gotten a close connection with the material. So be flexible and start small, follow student interests. All right, and the last step is to reflect and revise, and this is our team again. We're all sitting down and say, oh, what worked, what didn't, what should we change? I think that is just so important because you aren't there by yourself and other people can see how it's going, even if you're just talking it through. So maybe you did do the experience by yourself, but taking some notes and then talking that out and saying, oh, I guess we could do it this way. I guess we could arrange it differently. That is really, really important. The main step for success to that is keeping records. You think that you're going to remember, oh, I don't know why none of our lettuce sprouted, or, that kind of soil, we don't want that again, or that fertilizer didn't do very well. Make sure you write that down because 9-10 months later, you might not remember, and then you don't want to repeat the same mistakes again. And so just taking a few minutes to journal something in your garden notebook at the end of the day is really, really important. And again, when you have that meeting, make sure you've got an agenda, make sure that you start on time, end on time, have clear next steps. And so that reflecting is, more than just the content that you did with the students. It's also, how is the space? How is our team? Is it diverse enough? Is it big enough? How is our funding strategies? Making sure that all of those things are being looked at annually, if not monthly, weekly, depending on how often you meet, and keeping those things in mind. I would also recommend that you pull in, organizations like informal organizations, nature-based organizations that can come out and you can do some field trips with them or some on-site experiences. You can really observe the way that they set things up, and get some ideas from environmental educators in your community. And so they're wonderful people to have on your team, and especially at this stage when you're looking at ways that you can incorporate new methods or change things that you have been doing. All right, so those are our steps in a nutshell. Like I said, I have been doing full day workshops on these topics for a long time, and even then, sometimes you don't get everything in. But I hope that you enjoyed this quick kind of overview. And the article in Green Teacher that was in spring 2016 does have more information in it. And so if you want to be a subscriber, I would recommend that, and so many wonderful resources that you can use. But yeah, I really appreciate your time today, and I wanted to thank you so much for joining us, and I wish you the best in all of your school gardening adventures.
Thank you very much, Mary, for another excellent presentation. And we do have lots of questions, by the way, that were submitted. But before I get to them, I just want to say that, it's the real pleasure here has been in listening to your session yet again. There's real brilliance amidst those many steps, and I was particularly taken by it. I didn't say this before, but I love one of the innovations is I love the way that you've created these stations with separate groups that are smaller, 10 or less students. I thought that is a particularly brilliant way to organize, and of course you made the point quite rightly that to make that work, it really helps to have volunteers. But I think we've published lots of school garden articles in Green Teacher, and we've done a few webinars on specific topics related to school gardening, but that's quite unique, that aspect. And I also really thought your point that you've made about, your example of trying to be more sustainable by thinking of your costs and how can you, avoid those costs, and of course using sustainability logic. One of your first things was to think about how to grow your own seeds by letting plants seed and then collecting those seeds, and having kids involved in that whole experience, of course, really enriches and takes the garden experience so much deeper, I think, for kids. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, Mary, for a wonderful presentation. And I was really listening to it the second time around. Really, a couple of things really leaped up at me. Two brilliant things in particular. One was the fact that you create these stations so that various stations, so you can divide up your class into groups of less than 10, and ideally with other volunteers to help you. But I thought that was a brilliant strategy that I'd not heard in all the years of publishing school gardening articles. And I also really appreciated your point about trying to find ways to make your program more sustainable. And you used the example of saving hundreds of dollars in buying seeds by essentially allowing plants that are in this year's garden to go to seed, so that you can have the students save the seeds and replant them next year. And you mentioned other techniques, but I thought, well, that's really great. Not only does it save money, but also really helps the kids get a much better sense of the whole plant growth process. And, so you've saved lots of money, but you've also broadened the education of the kids as well. Anyways, without further ado, we had lots of questions that have come in. And one of them was we had lots of questions about funding. And I think I'm going to distract from that because lots of people made suggestions about funding. And given that we have an audience from across Canada and the US in particular, and the sources of funding are different for each country, I think what I'm going to do is simply we'll pull together everyone's suggestions and send those out to the 300 people who signed up for this webinar, and so that they'll have that. But I guess I'd ask a more general funding question. have you found in your experience that you have to ask lots of people, uh, write to lots of potential funders in order to get a few, or what's been your experience?
So I think that it definitely depends on the project and the scope of the project. But I think that teachers and people that are involved in their projects don't mind, putting together wish lists and kind of asking everybody. um, so I have worked at nonprofits for a long time, and you never know who's going to have a little bit of extra time or talent, or some little bit of pocket money that they could give, or maybe even donate one of their materials to you. So, for example, I knew someone that really needed some grow lights, and I just was asking a fellow gardener one day, and she happened to have 3 grow light stations in her basement that she could donate. So I think that sometimes those small gifts can be exactly what you need, but otherwise, you're always kind of looking about ways to make your program more successful. And I would never stop, asking people to be involved with their time or talent. Yeah.
Fantastic. Now, you were mentioning that your own gardens at the school, of course, would be uh, the timing of the gardens and the is all related to the school year. Any thoughts about how to handle the summer situation? You know, what happens to your garden over the summer?
Yeah, I actually don't promote summer gardening for schools. I promote late fall, and then early spring harvest, and overwintering too. So putting some row covers if you're growing some cool season crops. You can carry your kale and your lettuce and your carrots all the way through. So really it's a 3 season harvest model. And then during the summer, you can cover beds to solarize them with a little bit of plastic and get rid of some of those nematodes or maybe some other pesky things you have, or you can put in a cover crop. And so then you're revitalizing the soil, but you're not out there watering every day. You're not weeding constantly or having a huge pepper or tomato harvest that no one else is being able to use. There are some great models that you can think about if you are really gung-ho about doing some summer gardening. You can have a community garden hybrid model where you have families adopt a bed for the school and they also get their own bed. So I've seen that work really successfully, and then they let the teachers and the students take over those adopted beds during the school year. You can have other situations where families come in and adopt the entire garden for a week, and kind of use it that way. So yeah, there's some things you can do, but really for most gardens I think it's just too much for June and July, and you're trying to take a little bit of a break, or you're prepping, or you're on vacation. The garden doesn't take a break, and so you come back and the weeds are huge and you're not really sure even where to start. So I would always say start small, and growing a radish can be just as magical for students as having a lot of other things to harvest. So think about those late fall and early spring crops.
Those are good suggestions, and I see Joe in the chat box is mentioning the idea that he runs a youth gardening program in the summer and basically takes over a school garden for that period, and hopefully that the school that uses the garden in the fall will have a well tended garden to take over. Let's a big topic, of course, perennial topic, and it does relate to summer and on weekends when people aren't in the schoolyard and so on, is how to deal with vandalism. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that those, we can't get away from it totally, and so those situations do come up, and they are teachable moments, unfortunate teachable moments. But starting at the beginning with having a strong team and inviting people to see the garden and be involved, creating that sense of ownership, so that when you're not there, you're never sure who's there, and it might be people who are enjoying the space or people who maybe have other intentions. And so the more people that you have that are positively engaged with the space, the more resiliency you have against vandalism.
Right, and I really like the suggestion that Claire made about labeling things, and the more you label things, the more people will, the less people will take, and hopefully that's true. Another question, and in fact, seeing you in your classroom right now with your tower garden behind you, um, reminds me of there. We had several questions about whether or not to use the harvest from your outdoor garden within the school and do some food literacy teaching around that. Any thoughts about or experience with that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we have had a pretty easy time in a lot of the parochial and private schools using the produce in cafeterias in the school. With the public school system, it's a little bit tougher, and so we have kind of found a loophole where as food is free, then it's not as highly regulated, and so it's like bringing in cupcakes for a birthday party. And so giving away the food in the garden and actually eating it outside. We just do little finger salads, and so you're picking lettuce and you're cutting up the radish and the carrots right there, and then dropping on a little bit of dressing. That can be really wonderful for the students, that really fresh tasting. But I think that eating and having eating be a part of your garden program really adds a lot of gravity to it. So it takes it from just being, oh, isn't that cute? Isn't that nice? To, okay, this is nutritional and this is important and this is going to help the students be, really engaged with their own health. So yeah, I think that it's a really important part of it. And I'm looking forward to getting these towers fired up.
Fantastic. You really stressed, and I thought it was a great point to stress about developing a team and meeting with your team and having good agendas and records of those meetings. Um, do you Can you say a little bit more about the types of people you want to attract to a team? Obviously, there's going to be other teachers from a school. Um, are there other people in the community, the school community, or the outside community that you'd want to include or seek to include on a team?
Oh, definitely. I would look first at your neighbors. You want to have, again, extra eyes on the garden after hours. So, who's across the street from you? Is it a business? Is it a church? Is it a rec center? So definitely start to go block by block and say, okay, let's look at who's close to us, and then reaching out to parents that might want to be involved, alumni students, community members, environmental education organizations, and local park districts, people that could give you resources about grant writing. Maybe you've got a bank close by that could do some financial help for you, or you have, just yeah, I wouldn't think of anybody that I wouldn't necessarily invite. They can always say no, but having a really strong team is great. Sometimes if your team gets big, say you have a dozen people that want to be involved, that can be a little bit overwhelming. So I think that it's great to have a core group then too of your teachers, your administrator, your building tech. So if the team gets large, you can start to have supplemental meetings with smaller groups. But yeah, just if people want to be involved, go ahead and reach out and get them on board.
Excellent. Can you actually advance the slide now? I do have a couple of more questions, but I want to give people a chance to write down the SurveyMonkey URL so that they can, before I invite them to fill out the survey and be eligible to win one of 2 free subscriptions to Green Teacher. You mentioned that, and thank you for that. That's a great answer. Boy, if one could get even half of those people onto a team, that would be a very wonderful team for a school garden that would do great things. We had a question from Robin about allergies. Have you had any experiences of kids finding, having allergies within a school garden?
Yes, and I think that part of it is because working in an urban environment that I do, a lot of times these students won't have been exposed to anything that we're using until the program has started. And so, first of all, you want to really engage with those parents and those people at home and say, okay, are there some allergies that I should know about? So that's the first step. But they might not know that they're allergic to a certain type of mustard green or something like that. And so, having small taste tests to start, making sure that you're communicating with your building staff. Is the nurse on hand? Are there other strategies that you can employ if you do have an allergic reaction? So have a plan in place, because hopefully you'll never have to use it. But if something does happen, then at least you have some steps that you can follow. Keeping a radio outside, keeping your phone on, making sure that you're always communicating with the students. I think that that's really important. So I've had some dermatitic reactions that have popped up. I've never had anyone go into anaphylactic reactions, but I'm ready for it if it does, and so I know the steps that I can take to make sure that the students are safe. But most of the stuff I have not had issues with, and so it's not something that I'm afraid of happening. I want the students to have new experiences. I know that that can be a result sometimes of a new experience, but I don't think that it should hold anyone back. There are so many great quick ways that we can now deal with allergies, that the students are pretty safe when they're outside.
Great. No, I think that's exactly right. And Joe made a really interesting point in the chat box about bees. That's often, of course, gardens attract bees, as they should, and lots of people are very preoccupied with the concern about being bitten, and Joe turned that into a teachable moment, saying that helping kids understand what bees are really interested in. It was a touching little story about suggesting that you ask kids to close their eyes and repeat 3 times, "I am not a flower, I am not a flower," and with the confidence that when they open their eyes, the bee will be gone and they will be unharmed. But we had several questions, and I think I'm going to deflect this one too, because you did talk a little bit about curriculum for gardens, and some people were asking about curriculum sources. One person recommended LifeLab, but in fact there are really quite a number of sources, and I think we had several good suggestions. So what I will do is make sure that all of those are in the email that we're going to send to all of you who are on this webinar and who've registered for it, hoping to watch it at a later date, so that you'll have all of those sources. So I think that kind of wraps us up, and as I alluded to just a couple of minutes ago, I've put up this. We'd really appreciate your feedback on what you liked and disliked about this webinar, and to do that, I will of course send out this Survey Monkey URL in the outgoing email that I just referred to. But if you have a moment to copy down the URL, you will need but 60 to 90 seconds to fill out the 6-7 questions. Most of them are multiple choice, and we'd really appreciate your feedback. But Mary, a huge thanks to you for doing this for us yet a second time. It's what do they say? 3 times the charm, but second is pretty good too. And you're a terrific presenter, and you're doing great work. And I'm just so appreciative that you were willing to do this for us today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim. I really do enjoy this topic, and I am so excited to get more teachers on board and help them make their projects sustainable. So thank you.
Well, I think this presentation does all of that. So listen, have a great rest of the day, and I'll let you go. I know you've got a class coming up shortly, and we'll be in touch.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Take good care. Bye-bye.